Morning, everybody, and well done. You are the soldiers who have made it through to the very end of the Edinburgh TV Festival. And well done also for crawling out from under your hangovers. We do appreciate that you've come to join us. My name's Anita Rani. I'm going to be guiding you through the next 90 minutes. This is Ed Talks, a session that's never been done at the Edinburgh TV Festival before. It's all about soaking up inspiration into our slightly dehydrated brains. I also want you to get involved. You can tweet if you want to join in by going to hashtag EdTVFest. That's how you can get involved. So what is today all about? It's about hearing from brilliant people. We're going to be talking about communication. We're going to be looking at the workings of the human mind and also thinking about creativity. And I think there's a lesson in television creativity in this very session, in that it's a brilliant idea someone else had that's been kind of jigged around and put back out there. Something that is original about today is the roll call of brilliant minds we have collated to talk to you in succession this morning. They are Steve Edge, the brand guru, Gurinder Chadha, the award-winning director, who will also be joined by the comedian Ramesh Raghunathan, Channel 4 news anchor Jon Snow, behavioural scientist Dr. Paul Dolan, and CEO of M&C Saatchi, Camilla Harrison. But let's bring up onto this stage our very first speaker. He's from the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience at the University College London. He's going to talk to us about the neuroscience of creativity and how coming up with original ideas isn't necessarily a team sport. I have no idea either, which is why we have a master to talk to you. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Professor Vincent Walsh.
I never cared much for moonlit skies. I never winked back at fireflies. But now that...
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out for some science on a Saturday morning. Creativity in the brain in 12 minutes. It's going to be a whistle-stop tour. So when people think about creativity, there's usually three stories that they kind of think of. One is the insanity story, that the people who are being creative are somehow a little bit off the radar. They're doing things that are very special in one domain, but they're a little bit loose in the head in other domains. And that's the kind of Dylan Thomas and lots of artistic stories. The other is the practical story. Lots of people who are super creative, and Steve Jobs has to be counted as one of those, don't really know that they're being creative. They don't think of it as creativity with a big C. They wouldn't dream of having creativity in their job title. He just thinks, well, it's what I do. I have ideas. I've been thinking about stuff. And it's a very practical thing. And I'll talk about those two things. The third is a kind of a romantic view, the kind of thing that Einstein said, which is that knowledge is actually, imagination is much more important than knowledge. And I think that's probably Cobbler's. I'm not going to talk about that one at all. Albert was a super physicist, but I really don't think that he's got much of an idea about where his own ideas came from. So, if you think about your best example of creativity, my guess is that most of you being nice middle-class people who are well-educated are probably thinking about some dead Italian who was very good at drawing and colouring in, and he's hung in the National Gallery. That's our kind of a standard for creativity. But I think we need to think much more broadly about it. My best example is Muhammad Ali, the most beautiful athlete ever to exist. He came up in 1974 with the idea of beating George Foreman, the world's biggest puncher, by letting him punch him. He walked into the ring. Nobody knew he was going to do this. Even Angelo Dundee, his trainer, didn't know he was going to do this. He saw that the ropes were a little bit loose, and he decided, I'm going to let that monster punch me. That's how I'm going to beat him. And that's got all the ingredients of creativity, years of expertise, a moment of insight, the ability to see it through, consequences to measure it, and an end product. So that would be the kind of thing that I think would be there in creativity. How do we get to those creative moments, and what happens in the brain when we do? And there are two stages. One is where ideas come from. Now, if I was to ask you people, how many hours a week do you work? Very few of you would work less than 40. Many of you would work probably 50 or 60. I think that's a bit retarded of you. What I would like you to try and do is try and work a little bit less, if not a lot less. Nobody ever had an idea at the desk when they were trying to have one. You have an idea when you're driving. You have an idea in the shower. You have an idea when you should be paying attention to a speaker, but you're thinking about something else. You have an idea when you haven't got a pen. You solve the crossword puzzle when you've given up and you've gone to make a cup of tea, and then the answer comes to you. You have an idea when you allow your brain to work without you interfering. There's something called the default network in the brain, which is a group of areas which are active when you're really not thinking about anything in particular. We used to think it was not doing very much at all, but it turns out that it's doing all the hard work that you think you're clever by coming in on the end of. So let's have a look at how we can investigate creativity in the lab in two ways. One is by reducing it to problem solving. So if I was to ask you, what is the word that links actor, falling and dust, you would all come up with the answer because you're all very clever. And if I was to ask you what the word is that links broken, clear and eye, again, you would all come up with the answer. But some of you will come up with the answer like that. It will come in a flash to you. And some of you would have to cycle through it. Not that you're any slower than the people who would get it in a flash. It's just that you might not be in the brain state to have that moment of insight. So how do you get that moment of insight? And it's not by trying hard. It's not by being at your desk. And here's how we can establish that. We can measure your brain activity while you're trying to solve these problems. And what we're looking at is the frequency with which your brain cells talk to each other. Now, one thing that's not going to happen in the next 7.5 minutes is that this person here is not going to talk to this person here because they're a long way apart and they're both concentrating doing something else. I'm not going to have a new idea in the next 7.5 minutes because I'm concentrating on something else. And if these two people were to represent brain cells in my brain, they're tied up. They can't connect with each other. But when we are in this default network state, these remote brain cells, remote people, can talk to each other. So we measure the brain waves, the frequency with which brain cells are talking to each other while you're solving these tasks. And what we look at is not what state your brain was in when you solved the problem, but what brain state you were in 2 seconds before you solved the problem. And if you're in a state where these default brain areas are talking to each other in a certain frequency band, it happens to be 8 to 12 hertz alpha waves, then you are more likely to have that moment of insight. But if it's not in that state, then you have to cycle through it and work things out. So we need to get into these kinds of alpha states. But it's not just these alpha states. Your brain talking to each other in certain frequency bands is important in other parts of your life as well, and also is involved in problem solving and creativity. Sleep, 37% of your lives, think about that, 37% of your lives, you only work for 19% of your lives. Work you concentrate on really hard, you even give your Saturdays to it. Really, you should be asleep now. You should be taking your sleep much more seriously. What happens in sleep is that you go through certain phases of different frequencies of activity. Some of those frequency ranges are good for remembering stuff that you learned during the day that was intellectual, that was word-based. So a different set of frequencies in a different phase of sleep is important for learning stuff that you might have done with action, say playing the piano or trying to solve some other motor task. And some of those stages of sleep are really important for those two brain cells to talk to each other in a way that they're not going to be able to talk to each other when you're awake and concentrating and trying to do stuff. So we have to give our brain these oscillatory states. That's how we get the ideas in the first place. But he's an interesting man behind me. Because he's achieved in several different fields. And these people are always interesting to ask what they think about creative moments. And his idea is that anybody can have an idea, and I think that's true. The hard thing is seeing the idea through. So how do we see the ideas through? And different brain areas and different brain states are involved in this. This is Edward Muybridge, who in 1860 was about to go bankrupt. He was failing in the Wild West of America. He was an artist and a photographer. And then he had an accident in which he damaged his frontal lobes, a coach and horses crash. And in that, he damaged the area of the brain that makes you give a shit what other people think. He damaged the area of the brain that makes you buy something at Habitat and say it came from Heels. He damaged that social part of the brain. And then thereafter, he became successful. He also killed his wife's lover and got off with justifiable homicide, which shows that courts can be creative. And what does that tell us? Well, this completely different part of the brain tells us that in order to push an idea through, you have to not care what other people think about it sometimes. You have to have that level of obsession. Steve Jobs' ideas don't come from nowhere, and he doesn't push them through because he gives up and thinks the idea is the big thing. The first phase anyone can have. I can have an idea, I can wear a hat that's slightly too small for me and hang out in Shoreditch and say I'm a creative type. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to push that idea through. And it's learning to care a little bit less, perhaps, about the failures, care a little bit less about how other people might judge your idea, to train these areas of the brain to be less active in these ways. This is a set of brain scans from rap artists improvising. Now, the blue bits are deactivations, and what's important about those blue bits is that they're the areas of the brain which are concerned with what other people might think, or concerned with whether I've done something correctly. They are monitoring what you've done just now. Those of you who learned a musical instrument at school will know that when you made a mistake, you then made another one because you were busy thinking about that last mistake. These are the areas of the brain that are busy thinking about that last mistake. In improvisers, people creating in the moment, they're off. These are the areas of the brain that were damaged in Edward Muybridge. So, I would say two final things. One is, you all know when you're in the presence of a bullshitter. He says defensively. Bullshitters like to make things complicated, don't they? They'll never say next to when they can say juxtapose. They really feel the need to put something between you and them. This is Richard Feynman, who solved the problem, or helped to solve the problem of one of the US space shuttle disasters by asking, is it cold in space? Yes, it's cold in space, Nobel Prize winner. Well, maybe your nuts shrank. And he put in the commission some parts of nuts and washers from a space shuttle into some ice water and said, they shrink. You send these things up into space, they shrink, your rocket falls apart. Never be afraid to be simple. That's one of, I think, the keynotes of spotting someone who is able to push through that second phase of creativity. And my final example would be the man on the left. I know he looks like the U-Tree investigation might be interested in him, but he's actually very, very distinguished cosmologist, Fred Hoyle, who didn't like the idea that the universe was expanding. He thought this was a really bad idea. And they had to explain the redshift at this time, which was why objects seem to be redder as they move further away from us. So in order to defend his static theory of the universe, what he decided was that, well, when photons, bits of light, are near to us, they've got very high energy, and then they go running off across the universe, which is an awful long way away. And as they run across the universe, they kind of run out of energy, and they get a bit tired, and they can't keep up those frequencies, so their frequencies become longer, and that gives you red wavelengths, long wavelengths, red light instead of blue, and he came up with the theory of tired light. And my message from which is completely wrong, but beautifully wrong. And I think one of the other things to spot when you're looking for people who have creative ideas are not the people who are right all the time, because it's not about being right all the time. It's about being right there, out there, on the very edge of ideas. And sometimes the best you can hope to be is creatively and beautifully wrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. Vincent Walsh. Nuts shrinking in space. And the biggest laugh was when you mentioned U-Tree. Interesting. Okay, next speaker. Self-proclaimed, check this out, guru, prophet, wanderer, and madman. I don't know about that, but he definitely is a very natty dresser. Here to talk about the power of branding, please welcome Steve Edge.
Hi everybody, I am from the East End and I am from Shoreditch, funny enough. Many years ago, I was very fortunate. Two things happened to me. One when I was 4 years old, that I found my passion. And passion about brands or about passion, and I found it. I found it in a bag of glitter, magic markers and plastic scissors. And things have never changed. And every day I go into my studio with my bag of glitter, my magic markers and my plastic scissors, and we create great things. The other thing I was diagnosed with was being dyslexic, severely dyslexic. And in those days, it was a result because you were seen as the village idiot, not dyslexic. And my dad, who was a hard-working man, who worked at Smithfield Meat Market all his life. We were a working-class family, but we had great fun. And my dad was an outsider artist. He created great things, and he was a great painter. And we lived in this bohemian council house, and every day was an amazing moment because we had all sorts of animals. My dad loved animals, and believe it or not, in the East End, there's a place called Club Row, and you could go and buy any animal you wanted. And the reason was because we had the most amazing pet. We had a pet chimpanzee in our council house called Primo. And Primo was the greatest pet you could ever have, a fully grown chimpanzee. He had boss eyes, big fingers like broomsticks. And our grandmother lived with us. And she loved showing off. And on a Sunday when we used to have lunch and she used to invite people around, Primo used to sit at the head of the table, waiting and eating with us, as he did every day, Primo. And of course, my grandmother used to get a packet of sweets and pass a packet of sweets after we've all eaten around the table, so the guests would, wow, unbelievable, it's amazing. And the packet of sweets would come round to Primo, and Primo with his boss eyes and his big fingers would look in the packet, get hold of a sweet, and then like, it's amazing. Get hold of each end of the wrapper, boss-eyed, pull the wrapper, and on cue, throw the sweet away and eat the wrapper. There you go, it's amazing. It was a fantastic pet. It used to go bonkers all the time because chimpanzees are Gert and Daisy. They go wild. Used to climb up the side of the house, up the guttering onto the roof and get the roofing slates and chuck all the slates into the street. None of that PC bollocks like we get now. Neighbours all ducking and diving. Hey, nearly got me by a slate by the chimp there, that one. Never, ever a problem. And of course, it was just fantastic to have a pet. My mates used to have hamsters and rabbits, and I used to go, whoa, that's a wild one. And then we started to kind of, get into the creative world. And luckily, my dad had a mate called Dennis Gray, who was head of IPC magazines. And he had 3 publications that were very close to his heart. And those publications were Practical Woodworker, Practical Homeowner, and Practical Boat Builder. And he married this great woman from New Zealand, and she was a dyslexic expert, and she was the one that diagnosed me and said to my father, I'll teach Steve. So I never went to school. I was home taught from the age of 4 to 13. And of course, in those days, when Dennis was doing his articles, there was no Macs and CGIs to create, if he was going to do an article on how to build a mirror dinghy. If you was to build a mirror dinghy, you can't now do it, you can mock it up now, but you can't in those days. You had to make it. So he had a workshop and a studio in his house, which was the house I was taught in. Every day I'd have my morning lessons, and in the afternoon I'd go and help Dennis. This time it's, how to create a mirror dinghy, build the mirror dinghy. So we'd have to make it in wood, paint it, photograph it in stages, create the article, do the artwork, all in his house. And by the time I was 12, he'd given me my own double-page spread, the Steve Edge double-page spread. Started getting some money, which was a result. And all of a sudden, there I am creating. 1 month, it would be how to make animal cages, the stick insect light box, the tortoise hibernation box. The following month, it would be Easter, how to decorate Easter eggs and make Easter cards. And I got paid. And then there was a terrible knock at the door. The most terrifying knock at the door I've ever heard in my life. And they went, and by then, I'm 13 years old, and I'm like Wednesday at the Addams Family. I made all my own clothes, as you can see. And I had a great time, but now the school board man says, this kid's got to go to school. So I have to go to school. It's a big problem because I've never read a book in my life, and I can't read a book. So they sent me to a school that was an amazing school in Dulwich. I won a scholarship there, and I lived in the art department for 2 years. I had the most amazing time in the art department. And at 15, the head of art entered me in for a big competition called European Artist of the Year competition. And luckily for me, I won it. And there's a big design agency looking at the work, and he said, do you want to come and work with us? And I went, yeah, I'd love to come and work with you. So I went and worked in this big design agency. And the first month, I got my pay packet. I couldn't believe it. I've never had so much dough in my life. And he gave me this pay packet. And I always wanted a horse. You couldn't buy a horse in Club Row, but you could buy a horse in Southall. So I managed to get on a bus and go to Southall and buy this horse. And I bought a horse off this gypsy for 60 quid. The gypsy taught me how to ride the horse. And I managed to somehow ride the horse back from Southall all the way back to the East End. And I hadn't told my parents I was buying a horse. I'm 15. And we lived in a 2 up, 2 down. We had a hallway, living room, kitchen, out into the garden. And as soon as I went back, knocked on the door, my parents went, wow, quick, get her in the garden, no problem, through the hallway, through that living room, into the kitchen. And every day I used to ride my horse to the studio, up the Old Kent Road, into the car park, very posh, the Aston Martins, the Ferraris, my horse. At the end of the day, I used to come out, big pile of shit at a guy, you know, in the car park. Governor used to go, no problem, I'll have it, I'll have that horse. Shit. So that's what happened. And then, luckily for me, they put me on the Muppet account, because this agency used to work on the Muppet account. So I started working on the Muppets, and then Jim Henson said to this guy, can Steve come and work with us full time? And I went and worked full time on the Muppets, which was amazing, over at ATV Studios in Borehamwood, opposite EMI. And then one day, Jim Henson said to me, Steve, there's a bloke over the road, he wants to see you. I went, why are you getting rid of me? He said, I'm not getting rid of you. I said, yes, you are. You just told me I've got to go over the road. He said, I'm not getting rid of you. This guy wants to see you. I said, what's his name? He said, his name is George Lucas. I went, who the fuck is George Lucas? He said, he's a producer. He's just made a film. Go and see him. Anyway, I went over the road, saw this very nice bloke, had a chat with him. He liked my work. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to work in the art department. I said, what do you want me to do in the art department? He said, anything you want. I said, can you show me the art department? They can imagine anything, you know, plastic scissors, glitter, magic markers, I've had a result. This is an art department of all art departments. So I did Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and had an amazing time. And I set my own design agency up. I liked it because I like the idea of bringing 3D into 2D. And the whole thing about being dyslexic is that if you're dyslexic, there's a lot of information given to us that you can't see or read, and there's a lot of learning difficulties out there. So I like the idea of being lateral, not literal, and being inspirational, not informational. How many times you get documents given to you full of information and you haven't got time to read it? Well, if you can put it in one nutshell, it's inspirational. And the thing about being lateral is very important. Because to explain about lateralism, what we created, why all the brands come to us, the Cartiers, the Christian Dior's, Hamley's Toy Store, Fortnum & Mason, Skanska's, they all come because we do that thing about the brand. You throw one ball. People throw 5 balls at everybody and you drop all of them. And the problem is, because you drop all of them, you don't know who they are, what they are, and you don't want it. If you can throw one ball, people get it and go, wow, that's the brand. That's the power of the brand. I want it. I love it. I need it. That's it. And that's what we do. And to explain it is that I was asked to go on top of Nelson's column. I went on top of Nelson's column. More people have been on Everest than Nelson's column because you can't get up there. But they was restoring it, and they asked 16 people to go up there. We went up the scaffold on top. His feet are that big. Nelson's feet are that big. And we're up there, and all of a sudden the bloke said to me, Steve, can you help me? I went, yeah, of course I can. He said, I've restored Nelson's column. I've restored National Portrait Gallery, Greenwich Naval College. I've done Buckingham Palace, and nobody's heard of us. Can you help us? Yeah. 3 weeks later, I go and see him. He's called David Ball Restoration. His brand is 15 years old. He shows me his letterhead. Now, you can't go that shit. But what you can go is, well, it served you well up until now. He said, thank you. He said, and it said David Ball Restoration, brickwork, lead work, stonework, copper work, zinc work, slit your fucking wrist work. I went, whoa, whoa, whoa. He said, no, it's not only that. He said, the problem is people ring up my secretary, because we're called David Ball Restoration. They go, can I speak to David Ball? And she says, nah, sorry, he's dead. I went, whoa. No wonder nobody's heard of you. You're dead. He said, I'm frightened of name changes. I said, don't worry about name changes, mate. When you're dead, you haven't got a problem. Still remember DBR, David Ball Restoration, DBR. People that know who you are, no problem. You haven't gone bust. You haven't changed management. People that don't know who you are, they don't care, as long as you can deliver. What's very interesting is, the thing about being lateral is get rid of literal. DBR got rid of the woodwork, brickwork, stonework, leadwork, copperwork. We came up with DBR, making sure the past has a future. Because remember, that's what we remember stories by. We remember the good stories, not the bad stories. And brands are about stories. And DBR sales went up by 60%. If you see the Westminster Abbey and Parliament, all these big signs, DBR, making sure the past has a future. It's very important to create a story around brands and throw one ball only and people get it. So be inspirational, not informational. Be lateral, not literal. And always remember, one big realization I had when I was a kid, 9 years old, in all poor families, in our poor family, we had a rich aunt. You always have one. And my rich aunt, good Jewish girl, I went round there one day, she used to buy all my artwork off me, all my furniture, all my design, everything I did as a kid. I'm 9 years old and she's got cabinets full of china, glass, cut crystal. And I said to her, when do you use all this? And she said, on special occasions. And a week later, she died and never used any of it. Any of it. And I'm 9, I've got older brothers, I always had the hand-me-downs, but good Jewish mum always made sure I had one party outfit. I said, Mum, you know what? From now on, I ain't gonna wait for a special occasion to wear my party outfit, because I'm gonna wear my party outfit every day, because I'm gonna dress for a party every day, and trust me, the party will come to me. Because I ain't gonna wait for a special occasion, because it may not ever happen, because we're a long time dead. We really are. And all those things that you've got, that lovely little silver backless number and those gold St. Louis blues you've got, get them on tomorrow, wear them, and trust me, the party will come to you and you'll have the most amazing time. And thank you all very much indeed.
Brilliant. Brilliant. See what he did? The power of branding. We are never going to forget that man. What happened to Primo, Steve? What happened to Primo? That's what we want to know. Okay, another story, another day. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, next speaker. BAFTA-nominated film director. She directed Bend It Like Beckham, Bride and Prejudice, Angus Thongs and Perfect Kisses. And joining her is a comedian whose show has been nominated as Best Show at this year's Edinburgh Fringe. Together they're going to be talking about the importance of diversity in the creative process, which is obvious to me, but they're going to come on and talk to you about it. Please welcome to the stage Garinda Chadha and Ramesh Raghunathan.
Destination, though you may find from time to time complication.
Hello. Wow, that was very inspiring. Thank you. I've got my mic in my knickers because I've got no trousers on. So if it falls and I do that...
I'll get it, don't worry.
Thank you. So we've had a lot of talk about diversity this session, this festival. So we're going to take a particular look on this based on our experiences. So I want to take you back to your childhood. Picture a scene. You're in the front room watching television. Mum's in the kitchen just finishing up dinner. Dad's reading the paper in the other room. Brother and sister are upstairs in their room doing whatever. And all of a sudden, something comes on TV and you're like, wow. And the next thing you hear is, Mum, Dad, quick, there's a white person on TV. And that was our childhood. So, from a young age at school, I was always aware that people would look at me and see something else compared to what I was. So I was aware that teachers would look at me and go, you know, this girl's going to have problems. She doesn't know if she's Indian, she doesn't know if she's English. At home, she speaks one language. At school, she has to speak something else. She's got family at home, she's got English friends here. She's suffering from an identity crisis. And I grew up thinking that all the time, that other people were looking at me like this, whereas I always knew that obviously with my parents, I'm going to talk about one thing. With my friends, I'm going to talk about something else. And there it started. So there is this, I've grown up with this perception that other people have a completely different idea of who I am. Oh no, this is annoying. I've got to do this all the time now. What happened then, as I went through school, I just dealt with this and carried on thinking that's their way of thinking. My way of thinking is different. And finally I got to my careers talk at school, like everyone has, and I didn't know what I was going to do in the future, but I knew that I wasn't going to do what they thought I was going to do. So I had a careers talk during which I said I really want to go to university and do some more thinking and sort of work out what I'm going to do with my life. And the careers officer turned around to me and said, really, university? I said, yes. And she said, I really think you should apply to some secretarial colleges because I think that is really suited to you. And it was at that point that I thought, okay, this has got to stop. This has got to stop. And really, I've been pushing that since then. I became very aware of how important the media was in terms of defining me once I'd left school and the teachers. And what I was determined to do was make people that looked like me and thought like me center stage rather than on the fringes of society. And I chose initially television and of course then films to try and do that. And I just want to show you a clip of my very first film, which was me talking about what it means to be British and Asian. And I interviewed a few kids and said, you know, how would you describe yourselves as British or what? So that, hard to believe, was 24 years ago I made that film. And Scottish, Irish, Welsh, Indians, you know, then was a complete novelty. And again, I'm thinking, hold on, why don't I see people like that on the screen? Ramesh?
Like I mean, I can speak from a comedy perspective, but when I was growing up and I watched, like, first saw Goodness Gracious Me, it blew my mind because I was seeing Asian people doing comedy, which just sort of, I mean, I've seen funny Asian people, my dad was hilarious, but I hadn't seen it in like a TV scenario, and it just blew my mind. And I remember thinking then that was going to be the starting point for something, you know, for that to carry on, and in some ways doesn't feel like that has happened. And, you know, when I first started doing stand-up and I was still doing open mic gigs and trying out, I got invited to an event, an industry event to encourage people to, from minorities to get into TV or whatever. And what I found was I turned up to a room where they'd gathered as many black, brown and disabled people as they could in one room and talked to us about how we could get on TV. And then we never heard from those people again. I mean, it was a nice event, but you couldn't help feeling like, you know, I feel like I'm ticking a box here. Do you know what I mean? I'm quite happy to take advantages if I'm just ticking a box. I mean, I'm brown and I've got a lazy eye. I'm happy to do whatever I can. But it just felt like, felt a little bit disappointing, you know. And then you fast forward to now, and I'm in a situation where, you know, I get on TV now and again, and like I've done a few Mock the Weeks and I did Live at the Apollo, and every time I do shows like that, I'll always get loads of tweets from people of ethnic backgrounds saying things like, it's incredible to see an Asian man doing this, it's so great, thank you so much, it's so wonderful to see you up there, which sounds like I'm showing off, but I don't mean it like that. What I mean is, that's wonderful to receive, but why am I receiving that? It should be just normal that you're seeing that. It shouldn't be a special event that you're seeing me on Mock the Week. It shouldn't be a special event that I'm on Live at the Apollo, but still, and I'm not just saying it happens to Asians, I'm talking about different, it can happen to any background. I'm just talking about my personal experience, is that people are surprised or they're pleasantly surprised, but that shouldn't be the case. It should just be a fact of normality, and it's just a shame that it isn't, and I'd anticipated that being the case, and it just doesn't seem to be. So we sort of knocked up, didn't we, a little, we can do a bit of role play, guys. Multi-talented. So
I'm a commissioning editor.
Yeah, and I'm a redhead for the purpose of this. Obviously, we're not going to actually put the wig on because it doesn't go with my complexion. So, okay, so... hello there. Could you
Hello, I'm David.
I am Ginger Ramesh. Could you tell me, why is it that there are not more redheads on television?
Well, Ramesh,
Yeah.
yes.
It's a traditional ginger name.
Yes. Well, we have commissioned many studies which have led us to commissioning several reports with very experienced people, albeit brown-haired people, but still they have an affinity. And this has resulted in us setting up training initiatives for new young redheads to gain work experience. So you can see we're really committed to representing redheads.
Oh, you haven't answered my question. Why aren't we don't feel that redheads are being represented on television. How would you respond to that?
Really?
Yeah?
Really?
Yes?
I mean, well, we've got Anne Robinson. We've got Ed Sheeran. He's always on telly singing. And you know, Catherine Tate's always on Dave these days. You know, we understand, but we do feel that, you know, there are quite, you know, there should be more. There should be more, but, you know, we do have quite a lot of redheads on TV these days compared to before.
I mean, our experience is that redheads don't feel that they're being represented on television. What is your problem with having more redheads on TV?
Well, you have to understand, you know, that redheads are a minority, and an important minority. But we have to find ways where we can get mainstream audiences, people with brown hair, people with blonde hair, you know, to really understand their stories and be able to relate to their stories, you know, without them seeing them as sort of minority stories. And between us, you know, people might always be able to relate to people with red hair, you know, because they have a different appearance, and obviously, you know, they're not mainstream. So we would really appreciate, you know, ways in which we can help bring their voices, you know, into the mainstream, you know, in a way that the majority of people with non-red hair can understand what they're trying to say.
Okay, that's a good bit of waffle there. Could you tell me, what have you actually done to get more redheads on TV?
Well, we've been doing loads. I told you about all the studies we're doing, the training initiatives to get new redheads in. But between us, we haven't announced it yet, but we have asked the Top Soap, with the writers of a Top Soap, to introduce a new redheaded family.
Wow, that is exciting.
Yeah, we're very excited about it. It's
Wow.
a superb storyline
Right.
about how the redhead family are initially shunned by the community
Right.
within the soap, but eventually they're accepted despite their obvious differences.
Wow, that is so inspiring. I really feel great about that. I really feel,
Yeah,
wow.
I'm very pleased.
A
yeah.
whole family.
Yes, yes.
Times are a-changing, aren't they?
Yes.
You've got a big redhead star coming in, I understand. Is
Yes,
that
this is the big news.
Right.
We're all about creating stars, you know, and if we
Yeah.
can create more redhead stars, we'd be over the moon. But since they are a bit hard to find, and we often find people with red hair a bit reticent to come and talk to us, you know, between us, you know, which is why if we could get more redheads coming in, talking to us with stories that would appeal to people with brown hair and blonde hair, I think, you know, that's the answer. But in the meantime, while we wait for that to happen, we've got a brilliant idea. We're going to ask Sanjeev Bhaskar to ginger up.
right? Well, that is insulting. Okay.
Yeah, so thank you very much for coming to see us. We'll see you again next year.
It's the end of the play. That's the...
So what happens then when you do show people who think they're invisible? What happens when they do come on the screen? So I was commissioned in 1991 to make a film for the BBC on, you know, what it's like to be Asian and elderly in Britain today. Now that sounded like it could be a particularly dull but worthy programme. So I decided again to think naturally and sidestep what people might be expecting me to do. And this is what we did.
Yeah, I mean, all I would say sort of, is that my perception, or the perception of people that I know from minorities, is that it's a, sort of almost like a one in, one out. You know, Stephen K. Amos makes a joke when he does a high-profile gig of, "Don't worry, Lenny Henry's not dead." Like, that's, but I am here. You know, it feels like that you have to wait for an opportunity, or if you're pitching something, you can't pitch something because they've already got an Asian act that's doing something. And so we want it to be a point where people don't feel like it's a commitment that's just being said to tick a box of it, but actually change is happening, and it doesn't, you know, certainly with the people I talk to, they don't feel like it's necessarily taken place so far.
The point about diversity for me is that commissioning bodies, you know, television, one has to take a leap of faith. One has to take a leap of faith and trust in the people and the stories that they're going to bring that might not be from your perspective. One has to give up a bit of control in order to have true diversity, because my experiences are going to be very different to your experiences as a commissioner. But ultimately, there's more that, you know, that we will have in common. And so by trusting me to tell a story, you are going to get your own society back, but through a different lens. And I think that's where the disconnect is that ability to reach out and trust another story and know that it's going to be a different perspective that might not be your perspective, you know, and trust that person to deliver something that will be different, but ultimately deserves to be mainstream. I did that. It took me 5 years to get a particular film off the ground about an 18-year-old Indian girl who grew up in Southall who wanted to play football. But finally, we did get it off the ground, even though everyone said no one wants to see a film about an Indian girl playing football. And of course, that film went on to be one of British cinema's biggest hits, you know, Bend It Like Beckham. But the most important thing for me about that film, you know, was not the massive box office. The most important thing was one screening that we had in Manchester very early on in the film, when the film was being released. It was before we knew it was going to be a big hit. And we had a special screening in Manchester, and this was just after the Oldham riots. And at the end of the screening, a woman came up to me, an English woman, and smiled at me and said, you don't know what you've done for those of us who live around here. And it took me a while to work out what she was saying. And she said, after what's been going on around here, what you just showed us is that everyone wants the best for their kids. And for me, it was the high point of my life, my career, because what I'd managed to do was show this woman that actually I'm not different, that actually my family's not different. And she saw that we were all the same. And ultimately, I think there is more that unites us than makes us different. Thank you. That way?
Oh, no, you can go that way, I'll go that way.
That way.
Look, three Asians on a stage. This has got to be an EdTV Fest first. I still phone up my mum. Now, I don't shout into the other room, but I literally pick up the phone to tell my mum that someone Asian is on telly. How sad is that? Okay, and Gurinder, instrumental in I was just quickly, I know we're massively over already, but I was 13 years old, watched a film called Bargee on the Beach, directed by an Indian woman, written by an Indian woman, starring, acted by Indian women in Britain, and I thought, flipping heck, this reminds me of me, I love this. But the thing about that movie is it's just a brilliant British movie, regardless of the fact that it's full of wicked, awesome Indian women. Anyway, next speaker is going to talk to us about the dark arts of controlling our minds and the way they behave. He is from the LSE. He talks about behavioural science. He is a professor. His name is Dr. Paul Dolan.
Well, cool. Thank you, everybody, for turning up. So, what am I going to say? Well, the first thing to say is you can't trust a single word that comes out of someone's mouth. You certainly can't trust what they say about what they're going to do, or indeed even why they've just done what they did, because most of what we do is driven by automatic processes that we're not consciously aware of. So, let's imagine sitting people down in some focus group or market research activity and asking them, do you think you like to be like people like you? Of course I don't. I'm special. And if anything, people like to be like me. Well, that's, of course, complete nonsense. We've evolved over billions of years, or 6,000 if you believe in creationism, to be like people like us. We take much of our cues for our actions from what others like us do. So we can spend a lot of time trying to get people to pay their taxes on time, for example. We can educate them, we can inform them, and we can tell them about what might happen to them if they don't do so. Or we can just tell people that 94% of people pay their taxes on time. Or better still, we can say 94% of people in Edinburgh pay their taxes on time. Because people in Edinburgh want to be more like people like them from Edinburgh. By telling people 94% of people in Edinburgh pay their taxes on time, and by adding further emphasis that you are different by being a late taxpayer, by saying 94% of people in Edinburgh pay their taxes on time, and you are in a small minority of people who do not, we can get £800 million paid sooner in 3.5 years than would otherwise have been the case. And importantly, if you ask people why they paid their taxes, not a single person will say, it's because I want to be like the other 94% of people in Edinburgh. We're unconsciously and automatically triggered and cued to want to be like people like us. And so if we understand human behaviour, if we understand some of these evolved and hardwired and innate unconscious and automatic processes, we can have really significant effects with very small changes. So let me talk about another experiment that we've done using norms. So working with an energy firm, randomizing people into different interventions, we are essentially telling people how their energy consumption compares to neighbours like them. So we give them a bar of their own energy consumption, and then we tell them what people in other households similar to theirs consume. For the low energy consumers, because of course we don't want the low energy consumers to think, great, I'm low energy consumer, let's turn the heating up and have an energy party, we put a smiley face on to indicate to them that low energy consumption is an efficient thing to do, and we tell them such. But for the high energy users, we don't do anything except tell them that their energy is high relative to other people like them. Over 4 months, looking, and this is fantastic data, of course, because we can look at half-hourly energy data coming off the grid. We don't have to ask people questions about how much energy they think they're using. We can observe real-time data from real people. We can reduce energy consumption, sustainable energy change, by 6%. Multiply that by every household in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, you've got a pretty significant change in energy. In CO2 reduction terms, that's about 160 cups of tea per household per day. That's quite a lot of tea. Now, importantly, what we're doing is we're observing the human animal in its natural environment. We're kind of like Attenborough and going out observing the human animal, ideally when it doesn't know that it's being watched. David Attenborough doesn't stick a camera under animals' noses with the animals knowing it's there, because people behave differently when they're being watched. That's something quite important for television, by the way. So we're ideally watching people in their natural worlds without them knowing that they're being watched. And as I say, we can get, with this randomized trial, we can get people to turn their thermostats down, largely just by telling them how their energy compares to other people. Now, one of the basic insights of being trained in, well, first of all, I was trained and have a PhD in economics, and what economics tells us is that people respond to incentives. So if you fine and punish and pay people, you can change their behavior. So in the same energy trial, with a separate set of people, we offer people £100 to reduce their energy consumption by 30%. Now, actually, of course, people can't turn their thermostats down by that much. So this is a fantastic intervention because people really try hard and we don't actually have to pay any cash out. And we get about an 8% change in energy consumption. So what's that, like 200 cups of tea a day? By offering people a financial incentive to turn their thermostats down to use less energy. So we can use norms, we can use the social animal to change people's behavior, and we can use the economic selfish animal, if you like, to also change people's behavior in broadly comparable ways. We do that in a natural field setting. We're observing human animals without it knowing that it's being watched. We don't have to rely on what it tells us it will do or why it's just done what it did. And that would be a nice point at which to stop if I had a 6-minute talk. But since I have a 12-minute talk, I'm going to say something else that is a little more humbling, right? Because we're smart people, we get 6% reductions from using norms and 8% from using incentives. We're pretty proud of that. The energy firm that we work with also quite pleased too. And so we think, well, because we're smart, let's put norms and incentives together, right? We must at least get the same reduction in energy consumption when we tell people that they're a high energy user relative to neighbours like them, and we offer them £100 to use 30% less energy. Of course, we must get at least the impact of one of those on their own. We get nothing at all. We get no reduction in energy consumption whatsoever when we tell people how their energy compares to people like them, plus offering them the financial incentive. Now, I have to admit, that was a surprise. The first thing we did was to stop doing it. That's actually a really important lesson for anyone in public policy, private sector. Once you learn a lesson that what you're doing isn't working, stop doing it. Yeah. And importantly, the next step is then to think, well, why the hell did we get, how did that happen? Why did we get those findings? And then you start thinking, well, that's kind of might be quite obvious. Maybe you can appeal to the social animal separately to the self-interested one. If you try to do both together, you humiliate the human mind. You can't tell me, first of all, that I'm using loads of energy compared to other people, and here's some money to use less. So in our next round of experimentation, we're going to be giving people that same information, but from different sources. So the energy company will be either telling you how your energy uses to other people, and the university, the LSE, will be telling you, we'll offer you £100 to turn your thermostats down. Could we then, by splitting out the messengers for those informations, simultaneously tap the two brains? At the moment, we don't know. But the important point here is that we're doing this through an iterative, incremental test and learn approach, where we're learning lessons, we're getting feedback quickly about which things work, which things don't. We're stopping the things that don't work. And importantly, we're learning lessons from those. And I think that's one of the important points that I want to make, is that what I've learned from working, well, across the whole range of Whitehall for the last 20 years, increasingly private sector companies, is that the memories of failure, or let's not call them that, lessons learned, is the single biggest hurdle to effective decision making and to innovation, creativity, and so on. Is the kind of celebration of the fact that we made a mistake, but we've learned something from it, and now we're going to do something different. Actually, if you think about that in your personal lives, it isn't when people mess up that you don't like them. It's when people don't put right having messed up. In fact, and you know this too, Steve, brands as well can often get more brand loyalty when they make a mistake and quickly put it right afterwards. If you can learn a lesson, if you can hold your hands up, you can rectify that error, people will like the brand more afterwards, and you like people in your personal life more afterwards. So almost you might kind of think about engineering messing up and then being able to put it right afterwards to get people to like you more. That's kind of partly true. So what we need to do in all of our work, in television, in public policy and elsewhere, is to essentially launch a load of very cheap dinghies. Watch 9 of the 10 of them sink and be quite happy that they've sunk. 1, because they didn't cost very much to launch, and 2, we've learned lessons from why they sunk. And then we increasingly load ballast on the dinghy or sailboat that's sailing in the right direction, till in the end we've built a super tanker, public policy or TV commissioning or whatever it is, some brand, through a test and learn approach. Rather than, what we typically do is try to build a super tanker in the shipyard. Get all the expertise in, spend loads of money doing market research, customer insight, all the things that are hopeless. Build the super tanker, launch it to a fanfare, watch it sail in the wrong direction or start sinking, and then throw some more money at it to try to show that it worked in some other way. That's pretty much it. I've stuck. This is like, you literally feel like you're going to explode when this clock runs down to 0. I've got 1 minute and 18 seconds left to say, first of all, again, that we can have very big changes, we can have very big effects from very small changes if we understand some of these unconscious and automatic processes that influence individual behaviour. And it's important that all of us are very humble about how much our conscious minds drive what we do. It's as if, like in a film, you think that your conscious mind, your Mr. Spock, is like the lead actor, and your automatic system has got a bit part. Actually, it's the other way round. And so if you understand those automatic processes, you can have big effect from very small changes. Be humble about what we know, because context matters. We didn't know that putting norms and incentives together in that trial would have no effect. Learn lessons quickly, ditch that sailboat, and load the ballast on the one sailing off in the right way. And as I say, in the case of tax, to use that example that I started with, to get £800 million in 3.5 years quicker than would otherwise be the case from changing the typeface, that's a pretty good effect. Thank you very much, with 10 seconds left. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. I could just keep listening all day. It's not long enough. Like the soothsayers, they have all the answers between them. So, on to our next guest. How do you fuel, foster, and manage creativity? Well, I'm very excited to bring onto the stage our next guest. She is the head honcho, the queen bee, the CEO of global advertising agency M&C Saatchi. Please welcome Camilla Harrison.
Hello. God, he's not wrong. That is a massive clock. Right. I am today going to shortly get some slides up, because if I haven't got those up, it's going to be very rambly. Any slides at all? Okay. While someone looks, all the comedy was in the slides as well, and I only had 2 gags. Right. What I wanted to do today is talk to you about how we try and run a creative business, and in particular, how you try and run a creative business and produce a creative product Are they going to come up? Can I just find out? Yay, there we go. It's just otherwise I was going to talk about something else. Right, back to this. That's 30 seconds in the can for me. Nurturing creativity. In advertising, it's hard running a creative business. I'm going to try in 12 minutes to tell you how to come up with, sell, and deliver, most importantly, creative ideas. And we have to do that quickly, we have to do it for money, and we have to do it again and again and again, usually all at the same time. And it is not like that. I'm sick of Mad Men. My life is more like that, in honesty. There's a lot of that going on. So, a bit of context. I don't know who works in what sort of different types of TV business in the room, but for us, it's about clients coming in and they're really specific about what they want, to the point where quite often they say, I'd like John Lewis. And you're like, but you're not John Lewis. Or, I'd like a meerkat, brilliant. Or, I'd like a gorilla, fantastic. No, you can't. Secondly, how would you like it to be? Can you try and be quite specific? Aspirational, accessible, oh, hello, innovative, inclusive, contemporary, relevant. Gosh, how very specific. And human, as opposed to what? Right. And then we also get these sort of audience types. So we need to talk to people like stressed suburbans. Who's a stressed? I mean, I think that's probably me, but I don't know. I think I'm a poor value seeker, but I am probably a value seeker as well. That's another thing. Or you get these people called things like Colin and Jane, who are actually my parents, but you get these ridiculous people that we have to talk to. So anyway, that's the context in which we work. And like everyone else, we have budget, we have time, and we have opinions all battling against that process. Budget's usually tiny, time's usually really short, and guess what? Lots of those. So, I'm going to talk, there's 5 things that I want to tell you about that are important to the process that we do. The first and the most important thing is starting it right, and we have creative planners, and they sort out a lot. They challenge those questions we get from clients about why they want a meerkat, and investigate. They then immerse and help the creative people really understand the audiences they're talking to and what they're doing. And then they help inspire and get that creative process off and running. So if Nike, as in one of my previous agencies, comes to us and says, I want to sell more running shoes, actually what it turned out was that they wanted to be more credible in running and that sales were dropping off because they were losing their credibility in running. So running shoes were really down. That led to Run London, which was about getting Nike authoring kind of running and getting credibility back. Immersing is not just about drinking. However, if you're doing a drink drive ad, it's really important. So we took, in another agency I was working, we took the creatives into a pub, we gave them 2 pints, and then we made them do lots of tests. And the whole point about that was showing them that actually even 2 pints can affect your judgment, putting them in the shoes of the audience. And inspiring, this is done by creative strategists in our business, but this is about kind of giving the creative something to run with. So if we're trying to get teenagers to cross the road safely and doing communications, they don't care about the road. What they care about, and what those creative planners find out about that they care about, is that they think they're going to be famous. They think they're going to be on MTV Cribs or whatever it is. So if they die on the road, they lose their dreams. So that was what their brief was. That led to the longest running campaign for teen road safety about don't die before you've lived. And it was all about your dreams being taken away from you. And that halved the amount of teenagers being killed on London's roads. We've talked a bit about collaboration today, creative collaboration. I like to think about creative collision. I think it's a bit more interesting. Creative people find it quite hard to collaborate, particularly if they're with their peers and they're the same sorts of people. So when it gets really interesting and when something really good comes out of it is when you get not just different skills, and we all have to get different skills in a room together today because the communications, the media landscape's really complicated, but it's when you get brains that are different, really, today we've heard from people who come from such different walks of life and they come at creativity even differently, and that's when it starts to get really interesting, and then you get different points of view and different perspectives, and that's when you get genuinely different outcomes. You also get good fights, you get great arguments, and it's a bit more spicy, so I enjoy that. It's very difficult to manage though, and that's why being able to accelerate and sort of hothouse that process is really important. So the one thing about I think, from what I know about the TV industry, certainly from the advertising industry, is the enemy is volume. You've got so much to produce, and you've got to come up with ideas quickly and again and again and again. How do you help those be quality ideas? And the answer to almost everything is space. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the space we create for the creative process to happen in. But the truth is, actually, it's about a sort of quality of time. So the less time you have, the more the quality of that time is important. So actually, a lot of the time, if we're pitching, we'll take our creatives and our team and all those people with all those different mindsets, and you just go somewhere different and surprising, where you've never had an idea before and you've never been to before, and you lock people, send them off somewhere, and that's when really, really good stuff happens quickly. So if ever you need an idea in a hurry, the best thing to do, I think, is just get out of normal life. Selling, you could talk about selling all day, but once you've had the idea, the most important thing is then how do you get that idea sold to all the stakeholders and all the people you're going to need to bring along with you in the process if you're ever going to deliver this thing. And this is, I think, where the forensic brain that we were talking about earlier, that the planners have, and that creative brain, then has to turn into a legal brain. Because actually now, and it's so easy to do it now, and it's absolutely brilliant, the more creative your idea is and the more creative your solution is, the more you can use data to help sell it. If you want to suggest something that's never been done before, and you're going to have a big leap of faith in that, and someone needs to put a lot of money behind that, the best way you can do that is by saying evidence shows that X number of people are interested in this, or this thing did really well and it did Y, and people went off after that and did this. And the more you can construct an evidence-based argument, the more success you'll have in selling it. Make that case, know what it is that you're selling. The worst thing that we do in our industry is we get so excited about ideas, sometimes we just run in and we forget that no one's been on that journey with us, and it's all a bit of surprise. So how you tell that story and how you sell it is critical. And of course, being really simple, because the amount of times I've been in a pitch, and then I've spoken to a client afterwards and talked about how fantastic I thought our pitch was, and they've said, oh God, were you the ones, and there was that guy with the blue shirt who spilt the coffee? And you're like, really? That's what you remembered from our brilliant, fantastic. So being really, really clear, people only remember one thing. What is it that you want them to remember when you're selling something? But when you've sold the idea, then you've got to deliver the idea. And sitting and looking at something being on air, looking at something being out there in our world, sitting on a poster for week after week after week when you drive down the road, for example, and it not being what you'd hoped it be. This is where I think our industry, a lot of the time, things start to go wrong. And the truth is, that selling process, and I don't mean selling in the pulling the rug out from underneath way, I mean a sort of really considered reason as to why you can persuade people to come with you on the journey and protect an idea and nurture the integrity of an idea through a process, is that you have to keep selling. You have to, as every time you hit a juncture in that process, a junction, you have to make a decision, a creative decision. Are we going to do it like this or this? Are we going to work with these people or those people to deliver it? You have to go back to that model and you have to think about, well, hang on a minute, the more of a risk I want to take here and the more different I want it to be and the more brave I need to be, the more I need to find data and evidence to suggest that. And I need to then keep refining my case and keep bringing the people with me so that everyone feels part of it. When it all unravels is when you go and you show something to someone and it's not what they have in their head. It's that simple and they can't get their head around it. And that's where, for us, and I think this is, when we're pitching to a new business client, it doesn't matter so much. But when we are pitching to an existing client who we work with, this is where a relationship can start to go into a bad place. And I think for people who pitch regularly to the same people, if you've had a bad experience where delivering a creative product was painful, that's going to really predispose you not to want to do that again. So these are all conditions to help make great creative product, because if you're working with a brand or an organisation or a client or an individual that knows that you deliver a great creative product painlessly and enjoyably, they're going to be so much more predisposed to giving you that business again or buying your big creative idea again. So that's it, pretty much. In summary, cradle to grave, having ideas, 3 things I think are really important in our industry, certainly. Difference is good. We have Far too many people from Shoreditch in baggy jeans, I'll admit that. But the more you can open that up, the more different points of view and perspectives you can get into that process, the better. The more you can collide them, the quicker that process will happen. Generosity is probably the most powerful tool at your disposal. The more people who can own an idea and feel ownership of it, and the more we and the less my there is, the better. And when you're debating the finesse of how you execute an idea, listening and being seen to listen and hearing people and hearing what is worrying them and troubling them and trying to take that into account will help you win the war, even if you lose the battle, about the smaller things. And then the final thing, the most important thing, is that today, data is the friend of creativity. I think that is the one thing that has profoundly changed our business and how we do creativity over the last couple of years. There is so much information out there. There is no excuse for not being able to back up and make someone feel safe and secure about buying into and developing the riskiest and most brave idea you could possibly imagine. You've just got to build in time to get the data and sell the story around it. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Camilla. That was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Difference is good. Be brave, be risky. We like it, we like it. Okay, now to our final speaker, who really doesn't need an introduction. He's going to talk to us about the golden age of communication, which is what we are entering. He is the anchor of Channel 4 News and TV heartthrob. Give it up for Jon Snow.
Hashtag Ferguson was tweeted about just under 1 million times before CNN mentioned the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. The police chief would have learnt more about the actions of his policemen if he'd been following Twitter than following his own drones and listening to the talkback from the policemen's walkie-talkies. Even the co-founder of Twitter, who just happened to come from St. Louis, or St. Louis if you're American, who had made a journey down to his hometown in order to report what was going on, cracked his way onto Twitter, and he has a following of 2.6 million, and he played it for all it was worth. So let's then retreat back to Kampala, 1978. Idi Amin has just been deposed, and he's somewhere on the run. We're in our hotel, and we hear that he's making for the shoreline of Lake Victoria, and we go in hot pursuit. But before we do, we send a telex, because that's the only way we can communicate with our office in London. And we sent a telex saying, have gone after Amin, he's gone. And with that, we're off, and we pursue him down with the Tanzanian military along the shoreline road towards the great dam at the Owen Falls, and we never quite catch up with him. And we just see him and his entourage, several wives, a few security people, and he's away, and we see a helicopter rising from beyond the dam. But we have no idea whether he's on it, where he's going, who provided the helicopter. In fact, really, we don't know very much at all, except that he may have left the country. He may have been on that helicopter, and we have no idea where it may have gone. We return back to Kampala, and we start sorting out our shipment of film, and I start recording my wild track of vague information about what we've seen, and I try to speak as much as possible to the pictures that they will look at in London once they've been processed in the chemical bath. And 3 days after Idi Amin flees in a helicopter, or we think he does, the story is transmitted on News at 10. That's news in 1979. These days, somebody with an iPhone will have captured the moment of him boarding his helicopter. Somebody will have tweeted it. Somebody will have got on their mobile phone and talked to somebody. and the world will be alive with the reality that this tyrant has fled. The helicopter belonged to the Libyans, it had Libyan markings, and it headed off in a northerly direction. Cut then to Tehran in 1979, and you find the hotheads, the students of the Islamic Revolution, have seized 52 American diplomats hostage and are holding them in the American embassy. And there's a fantastic chaos around the embassy. I went there, walked in, talked to some of the hostages, talked to some of the people holding them, and it was very clear to me the whole thing would be over in 3 hours. 444 days later, it was. And the extraordinary thing was that in that moment, I had more information about what they wanted, about what was wrong, about how the Americans could get out of it, than anybody could possibly have had in Washington. But because they had no information, they got it completely wrong. They played it unbelievably badly. They took the whole thing. They decided this was the greatest and gravest indignity that had ever been inflicted upon a diplomat any time in history, and they took the gravest possible umbrage and decided they wouldn't speak to them. So we went on speaking to them for 2 or 3 days until they began to realize this was one big standoff, and they were going to hold these people for a very long time. And world history, in a sense, has been shaped by that very event. Only now are the Americans waking up to the reality that Iran is a rather stable country. It may have a good number of human rights abuses, but it's a very westward-looking country, it's a very beautiful country, and it's a country rather vital to present events in the region. I believe that the revolution that we're going through is taking the world into a completely new dimension, and that we're very slow in reorganizing our processes as humans to establish the best from what is happening. The whole drift of governance, of journalism, of communication is in some way unable to kind of grasp what we should be doing about the Twitter sphere. There's a lot of hate. There's a lot of disinformation. It's very easy to rubbish Twitter and say, you know, what can you do in 140 characters? And of course, you have to explain to anybody who doesn't actually understand Twitter that 140 characters is almost the most irrelevant fact about Twitter. It has absolutely no relevance at all, except that it keeps people from waffling. What it does do is obviously to provide links. Links, you can link pictures, you can link moving pictures and the rest of it. And the most interesting thing is, for example, in the conflict that I've just recently been reporting in, is that in the Israel-Gaza situation, Israel won the battle and lost the war, lost the propaganda war. They were not fast enough on their feet to encounter the extraordinary images that were reaching the outside world. And what is interesting is that they've played this one before. There was another standoff with Hamas and rockets and all the rest of it back in 2009, caste-led. Then I spent my time standing on what became known as the Hill of Shame. This was a hillock overlooking Gaza. We weren't allowed into Gaza. There were no journalists permitted. But then, of course, this time round, they realized that last time, images of what was happening had reached the outside world, so why not let the journalists go in, because the images were going to get out anyway. But what I think had not been factored in was that people who mediated for audiences elsewhere in the world were suddenly seen in the midst of the images. And that had a very, very powerful impact. It's one thing to see images, it's then another thing to have people that you vaguely identify with in terms of information, if you're Danish or Dutch or German or Russian, and you see your own people in the field, in this situation, suddenly there's a new dimension enters in. And much more dramatically, these agents were not just broadcasting or writing for their newspapers or the rest of it, but they were on the Twitter sphere, on Facebook, and there was instant information pouring out into the outside world. Instant images of the extraordinary ratio between children, dead children, and the death toll, 1,900 roughly, and about 540 children amongst them. So it was quite an awkward ratio and a very difficult thing to combat. And in fact, the usually flawless propaganda machine inside Israel took a very long time to get moving. They were very efficient with telling us about deployments and what had been done overnight and the rest of it, but they were not efficient at rolling back the huge weight of images that was hitting the outside world, mediated by people who, in those countries, people had some sense of identity with. And so I think what's happening is that we're moving into a period of semi-anarchy, or perhaps total anarchy, who knows. ISIS, for example, is where it is in large measure because it is using the social network in a most diabolical and effective and efficient way. They behead, they transmit. I mean, instantly. We knew about the American journalist James Foley almost as soon as his head hit the ground. There was a massive shock, and it had far greater impact than the killings of all the unseen people in Syria down the months, which have caused almost no reaction because nobody really knows. It's very difficult to make any great human connection with what's been going on in Syria because it's been simply too dangerous for a Westerner to apply themselves to being there. So we're in this situation where once you drain the swamp of outside mediation, you leave the floor open to the most amazing use and abuse of the social networks. So we're in this chaotic situation. And we're in an age, therefore, where information is suddenly no longer the preserve of the people who are paid to operate in the conventional media game. And yet all our lives, we communicators, we journalists, we television people have, in a sense, ruled the roost. I mean, when I first started on Channel 4 News, which was about 25 years ago, if I received 2 letters a week in green ink, underlined in red, that was a lot of letters. The direct contact with the viewer was almost non-existent. A few phone calls would be received by Channel 4 or by ITN, where we were broadcasting out of. But in essence, we knew nothing at all about what people were thinking. And suddenly we're beginning to realize that our governance, our systems, are simply unfit to deal with this new world. Westminster feels remote. I see UKIP, I see the Yes campaign, for example, as in some measure markers of alienation. Alienation from what people normally do. They fish out their mobile phone, they catch up on Twitter, they catch up on Facebook, and there's something down there which in some way is supposedly ruling the roost, a roost that we used to report, but which now is overwhelmed by a whole plethora of information and communication that is flowing out to the outside world. And we're all at sea, but we're all suddenly clambering aboard it. But I think actually, potentially, for all the hate, all the other issues that cloud the Twitter sphere and Facebook and the rest of it, actually, this is a fantastic moment. The democratization of information. We just have to wrestle with how to make the very best use of it, because suddenly we who have brands, we who have reputations, have the opportunity to operate as mediators. And mediators are wanted. People want mediation. People want to know, is it true? How do I interpret this? Where do we go from here? It's the question everybody's asking about ISIS. Where do we go from here? And people want answers much quicker than they ever used to be given. That's all I have time for. I've actually got another 12 minutes of material, but I've run out.
Thank you, John. Brilliant, thought-provoking and poignant, and a brilliant way to draw this session to an end. That's it. Our very first Ed Talk's done. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you to our just incredible speakers. What a privilege to hear you all talk to us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your stories and your knowledge. We've truly appreciated that. I'd also like to thank the organisers, Gemma John Lewis, Anna Fern from ITV, and Edward Phillips from 2-4. Hopefully we'll be back next year. Thank you all. Thanks.